Hello, welcome back to the Joy Room. I am so excited to introduce our next speaker, a woman who needs no introduction in a lot of ways if you've ever worked with Spark. Please welcome Holden, who's going to talk about automating Spark upgrades.
Hello. Thank you all for joining me to talk about automating Spark upgrades. I know upgrading code is probably not people's most exciting activity in the world, so I'm really glad that you're choosing to spend some of your Saturday with me or watching a recording whenever this may be. So my name is Holden. My pronouns are she or her. I have it tattooed on my wrist, but it got kind of fucked up. It got kind of screwed up when I was in a motorcycle crash, and they opened up my wrist to fix it up. I'm on the Spark PMC. If you don't know what a PMC is, it's like a committer with tenure, except like it's a really shitty version of tenure because there's no guarantee you get paid. It's just really, really hard to get rid of me. And in addition to Spark, I contribute to a lot of other open source projects. I really love open source. And that's sort of what I do for fun. I've worked at a whole bunch of different places. Actually, right before we went live, I started talking about sort of how I came to Spark, and that ended up being I had been an intern at Microsoft, and then Amazon, and then I went to Foursquare, and then I learned Scala, and then I went to Google, and distributed systems are cool, and then I started working on Spark. And then I ended up going to Databricks. I'm a co-author of a few different books. Some of them are about Spark. Some of them are not. That being said, I get the highest royalties for high performance Spark. So I think everyone should buy several copies of it. And in fact, if you've forgotten to buy your loved ones a Valentine's gift, nothing says I love you quite like 3 copies of high performance Spark. Alternatively, Kubeflow for machine learning, if your loved ones aren't as into distributed systems. You can follow me on Twitter. Lately, it's a lot of complaining about living in America, especially health insurance. The slides from the talk are going to go on my SlideShare. And one of the other things that I try and do is open source live streams. And that's just because I think open source is a really wonderful community, and I want to try and encourage more folks to get involved. And so you can watch my live streams there. I'm really glad that Danielle thinks high performance Spark is rather amazing. That's really solid. You can check out my GitHub, all the code's there, and I've got a bunch of my related Spark videos in this YouTube playlist. Oh yes, that's a good one, Jim. Put the Spark back in your relationships this year by buying high performance Spark. So in addition to who I am professionally, I'm trans, queer, Canadian in America on a green card as of last year. Before that, I was in H-1B and part of the leather community. And I think this is important for us to talk about, especially in the data space. I think it's really important that we have diverse communities involved in building data and machine learning applications to ensure that we catch things early. And diverse opinions are really key to that. And so if you're working in an open source project or in your team and you look around and everyone looks kind of like you, or you realize you're working with the same 6 friends you've had from college with maybe very similar experiences, maybe this is just a reminder to like go out and try and broaden the communities that you work in. And I think we'll all be better for it. And for one thing, like I can bring maple syrup to the party, so that's solid. So we're gonna talk about like upgrading Spark and why does this matter? This matters because Spark changes, APIs get deprecated and eventually removed. In Spark, we try and not do it so aggressively, although I'll talk about that in a little bit. The other one is community splits are expensive, right? And so like upgrading from Spark 2 to Spark 3, that's nowhere near the same kind of change as upgrading from Python 2 to Python 3, but you can end up with a bifurcated community if it's difficult to upgrade. And this is also because I don't want to backport my code to Spark 2.4 for the rest of my life, right? Like I wrote a bunch of really awesome, fun Kubernetes features, and then it's just like, oh, I have to backport all of this stuff, and like that's not fun. But I'll do it. But I really want people to upgrade so that I have less like boring work to do. The last point is surprise cake, and I am super stoked about the surprise cake. As I was, waiting for the session to go live, I found out that our dear friends sent me and my wife Carolyn some surprise cake, and so we're gonna definitely finish on time so that I can go ahead and eat some surprise cake. I'm really hoping that it's tasty. Either way, I get cake. So this is a good day. I hope you all get some cake, surprise or otherwise. Now, if we were doing this in like in-person audience, I would ask for a raise of hands. Instead, what we're going to do, and I understand there's about a 30-second delay, is I really want you to share, if you are using Spark, what version of Spark you're using. And we'll hang out here and we'll look at my amazingly adorable puppy. His name is Timbit. Actually, Timbit, come on. Hey, baby. Timbit. No, okay. He doesn't want to come. Oh, Timbit, come on, baby. Come on. Yeah, all the way. I'm gonna go get a snack. And we. Yes, super important. So we get to see Timbit. He is my puppy. I love him. And it looks like, interestingly enough, most people are running Spark 2.4, which is sort of my expectation. I'm really glad no one's running Spark 1.6. So that's super exciting. Yeah. Do you want to say hi to the people on the internet? They're really nice people. Oh, okay. Yeah. And so Philip, that's something where we'll talk about it. And so actually it looks like there's a bunch of people using versions earlier than 2.4 as well. So that's interesting. But we can certainly see that like people aren't upgrading to the latest version. And I did a sort of informal conversation about this with some folks, and we'll look at the things that keep people from using the latest version. So I have a problem. Upgrading is hard. Let's fix it with computers, right? And so there's this wonderful blog post by Steve Yegi entitled "Dear Google, Your Deprecation Policy is Killing You." And he wrote about how he worked on building Grok at Google, which is a source code understanding engine that facilitates automation and tooling on source code itself. And so in the blog post, he talks about how having these tools make it easier. Oh, actually, Dom, Spark is not just locked on Scala 2.10 anymore. It's really, really big thanks to the Lightbend folks for their contributions there. But yeah, so, this sounds familiar, right? Grok, maybe we can use tools like this to help people upgrade. There is the fact that the title of the blog post had "killing you" in it. That doesn't sound like great, but we'll just sort of put that aside and focus on solving the interesting technical problem to start with, and then worry about like whether or not that was a problem worth solving later, like good engineers. So what are the open source sort of equivalents of Grok? So there's Scala Fix. In Python, there's a whole bunch of different options. There's 2 to 3, Python Modernized, Rope, Bowler, etc. There's GoFix. A non-language specific version is called SourceGraph. And if you're interested in this, there's some SourceGraph talks from Strangeloop that I would really encourage you to check out. So if you've got like Java code or something, definitely check that out. So most of these have interesting names. A lot of them seem to be created initially to upgrade language versions or otherwise like fix minor issues in your code, right? And that's that's good, right? There is some perhaps these tools, right? Like Python modernized 2 to 3, like it definitely means that they're probably more focused to the sorts of people who are upgrading language versions than necessarily upgrading libraries per se, but it's okay. Oh yes, and yes, Python for a language that says there's one true way to do it certainly has many interesting one true ways to do it. So how does this relate to Spark? We deprecate and then delete a lot of stuff. Generally, we try and aim for binary compatibility, but I think it's really, really important to look at this list of exceptions. Oops, sorry. And so here, Spark 3.1 excludes, that's a lot of stuff. Not even released. So Spark 3.0, and that's the major version. But like, this is taking up quite a lot. So there's a lot of removing old deprecated items. There's a lot of changes to existing methods. And just generally speaking, a lot of things that are going to be painful potentially when it comes time to upgrade, depending on if you've hooked into the internals or not, and which parts of Spark itself you're using. Yeah, okay, yeah. And so we see a whole bunch of removed deprecated setters from tree regression and classification models. So if you were using, regression and classification tree models, like you probably need to upgrade your code a little bit. Keeps going. Oh yeah, and then we just said like anything with data source v2, whatever, it's totally fine. We're good. We'll just ignore everything inside of that. Keep going. Okay, cool. So, okay, 548 lines of excludes. That's probably enough that upgrading is going to be a little bit painful. So let's try and fix this, right? And what could possibly go wrong? So the first one that I wanted to fix, because I ran across it, was the data frame reader JSON. Writing Scala Fix Rules is, comparatively simple. I did end up making a utils file, and we'll look at it in a little bit, for matching certain types of arguments inside of Spark, where it just turned out to be easier. But we're looking for where the JSON reader is being applied to RDDs, and then we just go ahead and we swap in, session create data set, and a string encoder, and we add the global import of the encoder. And so this is a lot easier. And then we have our little like recurse down the tree method, right? And so that's pretty easy. It's nice, we're checking full types. We're not just checking like for random strings. We're not just doing a regex search and replace. So hopefully it's not going to misapply too often. That being said, it's okay if our Scala Fix rules aren't perfect. It's okay if they misapply, right? Like we can go through and fix up the results. In Python, with Bowler, the select function, so we end up writing these queries and we do these select functions, but we don't really have the same type information available to us. So this could potentially be problematic. But like, so for example, 2 degrees became degrees, 2 radians became radians. Not the most exciting migration. One of the things that I think is really nice about Bowler is it has like an interactive mode where it prompts you yes or no as you're going through. So like you can quickly look at it. If you've got a rule which is like going to be a little too aggressive with its matching, it's relatively simpler to, I think, go through it one at a time, yes, no, rather than looking at a large git diff afterwards, trying to figure out which ones weren't perfect. So yeah, types totally help out. Part of this is greater than 10% of function names are not unique inside of PySpark. And that's a lot, right? So we could see like maybe 2 degrees and 2 radians. Okay, those are actually probably unique, but there's a bunch of functions which are defined on both RDDs and data frames, and we might need to migrate only one of them. And we don't have a really good way of saying like only migrate the ones that are on RDDs, only migrate the ones that are on data frames, and vice versa. Whereas in Scala, right, if we look back at our rule, it's a little bit easier to, you know, specify the full types and actually do nice migrations based on that. The other one that comes up is like, if you're using PySpark with pandas, then things get even more complicated. And this is because Spark has tried to maintain some similar interfaces to pandas in some places. And that's really cool unless you're trying to apply like automatic transformations, because then you might want to apply automatic transformations to just pandas or just Spark or vice versa. And Bowler has really no way of controlling that. And so writing the rules for Python is a lot more painful, and you have to be a lot more careful when you're applying the rules, because I think they're going to misapply a lot more frequently. So, okay, that's cool. Those are 2 simple rules. What about if we run it on a project? So one of the projects that I maintain is Spark Testing Base. If you are writing Spark code, please, for the love of God, test it. I don't really care which library you use to test it. I like mine, but I'm a little biased. That being said, let's go ahead and jump into what this pull request looked like. So adding Spark 3 support to Spark Testing Base, started off with just running the basic Scala Fix migrations. And so, oh wait, where is this? Oh no, this is adding the snapshot rule, sorry. There we go. I started off with running the sort of built-in migrations from Scala Fix. And so that was just like a lot of just sort of minor cleanups. But I wanted to run them separately so that the code, I could look at the commits and have a better idea of what was going on. My first attempt, the first migration that I did, was upgrading the SQL context constructor. Not the most exciting. Spark Session Builder, get or create SQL context from new SQL context. And that's a fairly simple transformation. The trick is, if you don't have the Spark Session imported, this transformation doesn't work. And so actually what ended up happening is I did this transformation, then the code didn't compile, so I reverted it, and then I ended up redoing it and adding the Spark Session import. Now the Spark Session import didn't end up grouped quite like how I would have wanted it in our imports. And this is actually part of where I had to write a util function that we'll look at the util library later, because the global import thing in Scala Fix wasn't quite working at the time. But yeah, so this just adds that import in all of the files where it's doing the rewrite. It doesn't change the imports in the ones where it's not doing the rewrite. And then so on and so forth. So all kinds of fun. And then it turned out that actually most of the remaining things was just like there's some duplicate code. And if I just got rid of all of the support for prior to Spark 2.0, my life was way simpler. And so I just went ahead and I did that. And I dropped the older versions from the cross build. Cool. So let's go ahead, take a look at the utils, take a look at the rules and all of that fun stuff. And we can see here that Timbit is having a pretty good day. Also, like, just to be clear, like These are rules to automate the migrations. It is a proof of concept, and it's tagged for do not merge in Spark. And it has a bunch of printlns in it. So like if you run this code, like be really, really careful. It might do bad things. Don't assume that it's not going to do terrible things. Okay. So this is the rename functions that we saw in Python earlier. I wrote some samples, of sample inputs and fixes. Oh, and Carolyn is coming. Do you want to say? Do you want to say hello? She's coming by in her spacesuit to take Timbit outside. I'm pretty sure you're on camera.
Which camera?
It's this one.
This one. Is that the one that can see the door, or is this the one that sees
This is the one that can see the door.
Okay.
This is the one that can see you now.
See me naked sometimes.
Yeah. But it's okay. You're not naked. You're wearing your spacesuit. That made for a very awkward conference, but we'll get back to that story another time. Anyways, so the Scala Fix rules are, people say hello, Chris and Rebecca and folks. And the accumulator rule is one where like it ended up being too much of a pain, so I haven't finished that one yet. And we'll talk about that as well. So Hive Context, similar to the SQL context migration, we add these new imports, and that's all kinds of fun. And we'll go past the examples of code that we're going to change because it's not. There we go. So the first step is the SQL context constructor rule in a little bit more detail. And so, no, this is still the inputs. Sorry, input, output, output. Oh, sorry. New. There we go. Rules. Okay, so this is the list of the rules. And the accumulator upgrade, like I said, is the one that didn't end up finished. You can tell it's not finished because there's printlns in it. The migrating the deprecated readers is the one that we had on the slides. The Hive context one we didn't have, but we can see here, it matches the old Hive context, looks for the getter create, and it swaps in the new one. So add Sparks and add global import is currently broken. And so instead of patch add global import, I have my utils function, add import if not present, and we'll look at that in a little bit down in the utils. And we do the same thing essentially with the SQL context. And then, So inside of the utils, there's some things that I ended up writing just because I found them easier. One was to find the Spark context name. And the other one that I thought was useful is add import if not present. And there is a function inside of Scala Fix which is supposed to add an import if it's not present. In my experience, that didn't work, and it just always added the import and added the import multiple times. And so this just parsed all of the imports and tried to handle wildcard imports. It doesn't handle rename imports or anything fancy like that. But it looked to see if the import was not present and added it. Yep, all kinds of fun. And then our rule seat, which just runs those inputs and outputs through the transformations and makes sure that they work. Okay, let's go back. Rockin'. So I would not be a very good person if I didn't warn you about where this doesn't work. And so as you maybe read in the chat earlier, and similar to the results that I found when I asked people what was blocking them from upgrading, is things like Elasticsearch. And so when the dependencies themselves aren't upgraded, we can't really automatically apply this to the source code of our dependencies, right? Our dependencies are published as jar files, so we can't automatically upgrade them. Like we could, of course, clone upgrade and push, but like it's not there. Programming language version change. One of the things talking to folks is there's a lot of Scala 2.11 code out there, and our resources are focused on 2.12 forward migrations, but there's not a lot of things to automate 2.11 migrations. And so Scala version change was the #2 reason blocking Spark upgrades for folks. And API changes, like what we can actually fix with this, was the third most common reason. And the imports that we talked about, it's a bug in Scala Fix. I'm sure it'll get fixed. It may already be fixed. I wrote these rules a while back. And we can see we have a sleepy dog, and this cannot fix the fact that we have a sleepy dog. Okay, so that's it for upgrading Spark. This really only took 30 minutes, and I'm sorry it went fast. But if you're interested in having children know the pain of using Apache Spark, you can go ahead and sign up at distributedcomputingforkids.com. I was working on this right before I got into my motorcycle crash, scooter crash. And now that the pandemic is not going anywhere, I have a lot of time at home to work on this. And so if you want to share the magic of Apache Spark and other distributed systems with children in your life, go to distributedcomputingforkids.com and give me your email address. And there's actually an early draft. And I promise I have someone else to do the illustrations besides the person who did this initial sample that looks like the elves are having a interesting trip. And so we'll get, or gnomes, we'll make sure the next design is less creepy and does not scare your children away from distributed systems. Okay. So that's really it for the material that I had prepared. And so go ahead and I can take questions from Discord, or we can, I don't know if we can move over to, oh, I'm very glad that Chris thinks this will beat the original terrifyingness of the German fairy tales. But yeah, so that's it. If anyone has any questions, I would love to hear them.